The construction stopped on a Tuesday. No warning, no explanation, just silence. In Zhengzhou, a young woman named Chen Wei stood in front of what was supposed to be her future home, an empty concrete shell, exposed rebar, silence where there should have been workers. She'd paid 2.3 million yuan for this apartment, her entire life savings. 10 years of saving every spare yuan, working double shifts, skipping vacations, delaying her wedding, gone. She wasn't alone. Across China, from Shanghai to Chengdu, from Beijing to Guangzhou, 1.6 million people were staring at the same nightmare. Unfinished apartments, empty construction sites, broken promises, and at the center of it all, one company, Evergrande, once China's second largest property developer, once valued at over $300 billion, now the largest corporate collapse in human history. This is the story of how one man's ambition became an entire nation's catastrophe, how a promise of prosperity turned into the biggest lie ever told to the Chinese people, how $300 billion in debt brought the world's second largest economy to the brink. This is the story of Evergrande. To understand how Evergrande collapsed, you need to understand what property means in China. It's not just real estate. It's not just housing. It's everything. In 1998, the Chinese government made a revolutionary decision. For the first time in modern Chinese history, ordinary citizens could own property. Not rent from the state, not live in government-assigned housing, own. It changed everything. Within a decade, property ownership became the new Chinese dream. Want to get married? You need an apartment first. Want to be considered successful? Own property. Want to secure your family's future? Buy real estate? By 2020, 70% of Chinese household wealth was locked in property. Not stocks, not bonds, not savings accounts. Real estate. Compare that to America, where it's about 30%, or Europe, where it's around 50%. In China, your apartment wasn't just where you lived, it was your retirement fund, your children's inheritance, your life's work, literally converted into concrete and steel. And prices? They only went up year after year, decade after decade. From 2000 to 2020, property prices in major Chinese cities increased by 400 to 500%. It seemed like a sure thing, the safest investment in the world. That belief, that certainty, is what made the Evergrande collapse so devastating. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about the man who built the empire. His name was Hui Ka-yan. Born in 1958 in rural Henan province, Hui grew up in grinding poverty. His mother died when he was just 8 months old. His father, a veteran, couldn't care for him. His grandmother raised him. He later described his childhood in stark terms. We ate sweet potato leaves and wild grass to survive. This wasn't metaphor. This was famine-era China. This was real hunger. Education became his escape route. He studied hard, got into Wuhan Institute of Urban Construction, and graduated in 1982 with a degree in metallurgy. Not real estate, not finance, metallurgy. He worked in a steel factory for 10 years. Then he quit, moved to Shenzhen, China's boomtown, and started selling apartments for a small developer. He was good at it, very good. In 1996, at age 38, Hui Ka-yan founded his own company. He named it Evergrande. In Chinese, Hengde meaning forever grand. His starting capital, $80,000, borrowed. His insight was simple but powerful. Chinese families didn't want luxury apartments. They wanted affordable homes with modern amenities, clean water, working elevators, actual insulation, build what people need, not what rich people want. Volume over margin. It worked. Through the late 1990s and 2000s, as China's economy exploded, Evergrande grew with it. 500 million people were moving from rural areas to cities. They all needed somewhere to live. Evergrande built apartments in second and third tier cities, places bigger developers ignored. Cities like Changsha, Guiyang, Nanning, not Shanghai or Beijing. The strategy paid off. By 2009, Evergrande went public on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. By 2017, the company was building in 280 cities across China. 280, and Hui Ka-yan, he became Asia's richest person. Net worth, $43 billion. From eating wild grass to Asia's richest man. It's the ultimate rags to riches story, except that's not how the story ends. Because by 2017, Evergrande wasn't just building apartments anymore, it was building an empire. Soccer teams, electric car factories, theme parks, bottled water brands, film studios. Hui Ka-yan wasn't satisfied being a property developer. He wanted to be China's next great industrialist. And to fund that ambition, he needed money. Lots of money. That's where the problems began. Evergrande's business model had a name, the three highs. High debt, high turnover, high growth. Here's how it worked. First, Evergrande would buy land from local governments. Chinese cities made 40% of their revenue from land sales. So mayors loved developers. More land sales meant higher GDP numbers. Higher GDP numbers meant promotions. Evergrande bought land everywhere, massive plots in 280 cities. Then came the brilliant and dangerous part. Before construction even began, Evergrande would start selling apartments, pre-sales. You'd go to a sales office, look at a model, and pay a deposit. Sometimes 30% of the purchase price, sometimes 50%. The apartment didn't exist yet, just a hole in the ground, but you'd already paid hundreds of thousands of yuan for it. This is legal in China. It's called the pre-sale system, and it creates a cash machine. Think about it. You collect money up front before you spend a single yuan on construction. That money, those customer deposits, they're supposed to sit in a monitored account until the building is finished. But here's what Evergrande actually did. They took deposits from Project B and used them to finish Project A. Then they took deposits from Project C to finish Project B. Then deposits from Project D to finish Project C. It's a chain, and as long as you keep selling more apartments, the chain holds. But if sales slow down, if customers stop buying, the chain breaks. Evergrande also borrowed from everywhere. Chinese banks, international bond markets, shadow banking institutions. By 2018, Evergrande's debt reached $100 billion. But that was okay, executives said. Revenue was growing even faster. Then Hui Ka-yan got ambitious. In 2016, he decided Evergrande should diversify. Why just build apartments? Why not build everything? Evergrande bought Guangzhou FC, one of China's most popular soccer teams. They spent hundreds of millions on international players. The goal? Win the Asian Champions League? Build Evergrande's brand. In 2019, Hui announced Evergrande would build electric vehicles, not partner with an automaker, build them from scratch. Now the target? Produce 1 million EVs per year by 2025, compete with Tesla. They invested billions into Evergrande Auto, built factories, designed vehicles. None of them ever went into mass production. There was Evergrande Spring, a bottled water brand, Evergrande Fairyland, a chain of theme parks, Evergrande Pictures, a film studio. Analysts ask the obvious question, why is a property developer building cars and theme parks? The answer, nobody wanted to say out loud, because property alone couldn't service the debt anymore. Which brings us to the wealth management products. In 2016, Evergrande launched something called Hengda Wealth. These were investment products offering 12% annual returns. In China, where bank deposits paid 2%, 12% looked amazing. Evergrande sold these products to their own employees, then to employees' families, then to customers buying Evergrande apartments. Employees were required to meet sales quotas. Can't hit your target? Your bonus disappears. Maybe your job too. Over 5 years, Hengda Wealth raised $6 billion from 80,000 investors. What were people buying? They thought they were buying safe, government-backed investments. What they were actually buying? Unsecured loans to Evergrande to plug cash flow holes. It was all part of the machine: customer deposits, bank loans, bond issuances, wealth management products, land purchases, pre-sales, money coming in from everywhere, money going out even faster. As long as property prices kept rising, it worked. As long as customers kept buying, it worked. As long as lenders kept lending, it worked. The machine was magnificent, efficient, ruthless, and completely unsustainable. By 2020, Evergrande's real debt, including all the shadow banking, the wealth products, the supplier payments, everything, exceeded $300 billion. $300 billion. To put that in perspective, that's more than the GDP of Finland, more than the GDP of Portugal, more than the GDP of New Zealand. One company, one man's ambition, the largest corporate debt in human history. And nobody, not the regulators, not the banks, not the customers, nobody seemed to notice that the machine was about to break down. Actually, some people noticed. They just got ignored. In 2018, when Evergrande's debt hit $100 billion, international short sellers started publishing research reports. These were hedge funds that bet against companies they think are overvalued. Their reports said the same thing. Evergrande's numbers don't add up. The debt is unsustainable. The accounting looks questionable. The Chinese financial media barely covered it. The government didn't investigate. By 2019, the problems were getting harder to hide. Ernst & Young was Evergrande's auditor. Their job, verify the company's financial statements are accurate. In internal reports, EY auditors started flagging concerns. Questions about revenue recognition. Questions about related party transactions. Questions nobody wanted to answer. Where is all the money going? EY didn't blow the whistle publicly. They kept auditing. They kept signing off on Evergrande's financial statements. Years later, after the collapse, people would ask, how did EY miss this? The answer, they didn't miss it. They flagged it internally. They just didn't scream loud enough. Meanwhile, across China, Construction workers and suppliers were noticing something else. Evergrande was falling behind on payments, not by days, by months. A construction firm in Wuhan owed 3 million yuan, payment 90 days late. A cement supplier in Chongqing owed 5 million yuan, payment 120 days late. Steel manufacturers, electrical contractors, plumbing companies, all waiting for money Evergrande owed them. Some suppliers sued, most didn't. Suing your biggest customer is bad for business. You might win the lawsuit and lose all future contracts. So they waited and hoped. Chinese investigative journalists were paying attention too. Caixin, a respected financial publication, published articles about Evergrande's rising debt levels, about the wealth management products, about the delayed supplier payments. The articles got limited circulation. In China, criticism of major companies, especially ones with Communist Party connections, requires careful navigation. Hui Kaiyan was a party member. Evergrande employed nearly 200,000 people directly and over 3.8 million people indirectly through suppliers and contractors. You don't lightly attack a company that employs that many people, but the biggest warning came from Beijing itself. August 2020. The Chinese government announced a new policy called the 3 Red Lines. The goal? Control the property sector's ballooning debt. Stop developers from over-leveraging. The 3 red lines were simple. Red line 1, your debt-to-asset ratio must be below 70%. Red line 2, your net debt-to-equity must be below 100%. Red line 3, your cash-to-short-term debt must be above 1. If you met all 3 red lines, you could increase debt by 15% per year. If you violated 1 red line, you could only increase debt by 10%. 2 red lines, 5%. All 3 red lines, no new debt. 0. Evergrande's problem. They violated all 3 simultaneously. Their debt-to-asset ratio, 83%. Their net debt-to-equity, 159%. Their cash-to-short-term debt, 0.47. They failed every single test, which meant no new borrowing, not from banks, not from bond markets, nowhere. For a company whose entire business model depended on constantly raising new money to pay off old debts, this was a death sentence. Industry analysts started asking questions. How would Evergrande service $300 billion in debt without new borrowing? The company's answer, we'll sell assets, we'll improve operations, we'll be fine. Behind the scenes, executives knew the truth. They wouldn't be fine. Throughout 2020 and into 2021, warning signs multiplied. Evergrande executives started selling their personal stock holdings, large blocks of shares dumped on the market. Hui Kaiyan transferred assets to family members, properties in Hong Kong, offshore accounts, getting money out while he still could. Construction sites across China were slowing down, not stopping completely, just slowing, taking longer, cutting corners, stretching the same amount of money across more projects. In January 2021, Hui Kaiyan sent a message to all Evergrande employees. We will definitely overcome difficulties and get through this together. That sentence, overcome difficulties, told you everything. Hui Kaiyan was acknowledging there were difficulties to overcome. By March 2021, Evergrande announced record sales numbers, 750 billion yuan in revenue, the highest in company history. What the press releases didn't mention, those sales were achieved through massive discounting. Evergrande was selling apartments at 20, 30, sometimes 40% below market price. They were trading profit margin for cash flow, anything to keep money coming in, anything to keep the machine running. In June 2021, the first public crack appeared. Hengda Wealth, the investment product arm, missed a payment to investors. The excuse, temporary technical difficulties with the payment system. The reality, the money was gone. There was nothing left to pay. One investor, a man named Liu Wei, went to Evergrande's office in Shenzhen demanding answers. He'd invested 800,000 yuan, his entire savings. The response he got, please be patient, we're working on it. He's still waiting. The warnings were everywhere, from short sellers, from auditors, from journalists, from suppliers, from the government's own regulations. Everyone could see the machine breaking down, but nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. Evergrande was collapsing, and when it fell, it would take millions of people down with it. July 2021, construction stopped. Not at one site, not at 10 sites. At dozens of Evergrande construction sites across China, work simply stopped. In Kunming, workers walked off a residential project. They hadn't been paid in 3 months. In Chengdu, suppliers refused to deliver materials. Evergrande owed them too much money. In Wuhan, electrical contractors abandoned a half-finished tower. The company was 60 days past due on payments. This wasn't a coordinated action. This was mathematics. You can't build apartments without money to pay workers. You can't finish projects without money to buy materials. And Evergrande was out of money. Home buyers started noticing first. The construction sites they walked past every day on their way to work. Suddenly quiet. No workers, no activity, just silence. Then the realization hit. My apartment isn't being built. The apartment I paid for. The apartment I gave my life savings for. The apartment I took out a 30-year mortgage to buy. It's not being built. Panic spread through social media. Videos of abandoned construction sites. Photos of angry crowds gathering at Evergrande offices. By late July, protests were erupting in Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Beijing, Shanghai, dozens of cities. Investors demanding their money back. Homebuyers demanding their apartments. Workers demanding their wages. The scenes were chaotic. Crowds of hundreds, sometimes thousands, gathering at Evergrande sales offices. Some crying, some shouting, some just standing there in shock. One woman in Shenzhen told a reporter, "This was supposed to be my wedding gift to my son. I saved for 15 years. How do I tell him it's gone?" August 2021. Evergrande's stock price collapsed. In 3 weeks, it lost 80% of its value. Billions of dollars in market capitalization vanished. Then a document leaked. A letter from Evergrande to the Guangdong provincial government. The content was extraordinary. If Evergrande's situation is not stabilized, it may lead to systemic financial risks. Cross-default could trigger widespread concerns in the financial market. Translation. If we collapse, we're taking the banking system with us. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. Evergrande knew exactly how many banks they owed money to, exactly how many suppliers depended on them, exactly how many people's lives were tied to their survival. 128 banks had direct exposure to Evergrande, 121 non-banking financial institutions, thousands of suppliers, millions of homebuyers. This wasn't just a corporate bankruptcy. This was a systemic crisis. International markets started panicking. Was this China's Lehman Brothers moment? Could Evergrande's collapse trigger a global financial crisis like 2008? The date everyone was watching? September 23rd, 2021. Evergrande had an $83.5 million bond payment due. 30-day grace period expiring. If they missed this payment, they'd officially default. The world held its breath. Trading floors in New York, London, Hong Kong, everyone watching the clock. Would Beijing bail them out? Would Evergrande find the money somewhere? Would they restructure? September the 23rd, 11:59 p.m. Hong Kong time. The grace period expired. Evergrande didn't pay. Official default. The largest corporate default in history. $300 billion in debt. Unpaid. Markets plunged. Stock prices dropped across Asia. Concern spread to Europe and America. But what happened in the markets was nothing compared to what was happening on the ground in China. Let me tell you about 3 people. First, there's a construction worker named Zhang Ming. He's 34 years old. Worked on Evergrande projects for 6 years. For the last 8 months, he hasn't received a salary. Evergrande owes him 47,000 yuan, about $7,300. He has 2 children in elementary school. His parents are in their 70s. He supports them too. When Chinese New Year came, Zhang couldn't afford train tickets to visit his hometown, couldn't afford to buy gifts for his kids, couldn't afford to send money to his parents. He told a reporter, "I built these buildings with my own hands. Now I can't even feed my family." Zhang Ming still shows up at the construction site sometimes, just stands there, looking at the half-finished tower he helped build, hoping somehow work will resume. It won't. Then there's Mrs. Liu. She's 68 years old, retired elementary school teacher. In 2019, her son convinced her to invest in Hengda Wealth products. Her son worked at Evergrande. He told her it was absolutely safe, government-backed, guaranteed returns. Mrs. Liu invested 800,000 yuan, her entire pension, her entire life savings. The money was supposed to support her for the next 20 years. 12% annual returns, 96,000 yuan per year, enough to live comfortably. When the payments stopped coming, she went to Evergrande's office. They told her, "Be patient, we're working on it." Mrs. Liu is now looking for work. At 68 years old, she's trying to find a job, any job. Her son doesn't work at Evergrande anymore. He can't face his mother. Finally, there's Wang Jun and his fiancée, Chen Wei, the young couple from the beginning of our story. They saved for 10 years to buy their apartment in Zhengzhou, 2.3 million yuan. The apartment was supposed to be ready in 2022. They planned their wedding around it, sent out invitations, booked a venue. Construction is 70% complete. Then it stopped. Here's the cruelty. Wang and Chen are still paying their mortgage. 11,000 yuan per month, about $1,700. Paying for an apartment they can't live in, an apartment that might never be finished. They've postponed their wedding 3 times now. Their families keep asking, when will you get married? Wang told a reporter, "We did everything right. We saved. We worked hard. We bought what we could afford. And now, what do we have? Nothing. Just debt. Just a dream that died." These aren't isolated stories. These are patterns repeated 1.6 million times. 1.6 million homebuyers waiting for apartments that might never be completed. 80,000 wealth management investors waiting for money that's gone. Tens of thousands of workers waiting for wages they'll never receive. Suppliers across China going bankrupt because Evergrande owed them too much money. A cement company in Hebei province, gone. Owed 50 million yuan by Evergrande, couldn't survive without that payment. An electrical contractor in Guangzhou, bankrupt, 200 employees laid off. A steel manufacturer in Wuhan, struggling. Evergrande was 30% of their business. The ripple effects spread through the entire economy. Every construction worker who didn't get paid couldn't spend money at local restaurants. Every supplier that went bankrupt laid off workers who couldn't pay rent. Every homebuyer who lost their savings stopped spending on anything except necessities. The protests intensified through fall 2021. By October, demonstrations were happening at Evergrande offices in over 100 cities. Rare public displays of anger in a country where public protests are tightly controlled. Then homebuyers did something extraordinary. They organized a mortgage payment boycott. The logic was simple: no apartment, no payment. If Evergrande isn't building my apartment, why should I pay the bank for a mortgage on something that doesn't exist? It started with a few dozen people, then hundreds, then thousands. By November 2021, homebuyers in 300 Evergrande projects had joined the boycott. This was Beijing's nightmare, not just a corporate bankruptcy, social instability, mass protests, citizens refusing to pay debts. In a country where social stability is paramount, where the Communist Party's legitimacy rests on economic growth and rising living standards, this was a political crisis, not just an economic one. And Evergrande wasn't alone. By September 2021, other property developers were showing the same symptoms. Country Garden, China's largest developer, saw its stock price collapse. Kaisa Group warned of liquidity problems in November. Sunac China struggled to make bond payments in December. The pattern was clear. Multiple developers had been using the same risky financing model as Evergrande: pre-sales, high debt. The entire Chinese property sector, worth $7 trillion, 30% of the country's GDP, was in crisis. Banks were sitting on trillions in property-related loans. If developers defaulted, banks would face massive losses. Local governments had seen their land sale revenues collapse by 50%. No developers were buying land anymore, which meant no money for schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Young Chinese people started talking about the lie flat movement. Why work hard? Why save? Why buy property? The system is broken. Consumer confidence evaporated. If 70% of your wealth is in property and property prices are falling, you stop spending. You save every yuan. You prepare for the worst. The International Monetary Fund warned China's property crisis could drag down global economic growth. Economists started making comparisons to 2008, to the US housing crisis, to Lehman Brothers. But there was one crucial difference. This crisis was contained within China, for now. The question everyone was asking: what would Beijing do? The Communist Party faced an impossible choice: bail out Evergrande and send a message that reckless behavior gets rewarded, that companies can take insane risks because the government will always rescue them. Or let Evergrande collapse and risk financial contagion, social unrest, international embarrassment. For weeks, Beijing stayed silent. No announcements, no bailouts, no rescue plans. Behind the scenes, intense debates were happening at the highest levels of government. President Xi Jinping had just launched his Common Prosperity campaign, targeting wealth inequality, reining in billionaires, redistributing wealth. Hui Ka-yen represented everything Xi was trying to correct: excessive wealth. The decision came down in late 2021: controlled demolition, not rescue. No full government bailout, no using taxpayer money to pay Evergrande's debts, but also no complete collapse, no allowing Evergrande to destroy the financial system. State-owned enterprises were instructed to acquire Evergrande assets at discount prices, not to save Evergrande, to salvage what could be salvaged. Priority number 1, complete unfinished apartments for homebuyers. The government would provide funding to ensure construction resumed on residential projects, social stability first. Priority number 2, prevent banking system collapse. Regulators worked with banks to restructure Evergrande's debts. The message to other developers was clear: you're on your own, but we'll protect the people you hurt. In March 2022, criminal investigations officially began. Not just regulatory investigations, criminal investigations. Police started examining where the money went. The $300 billion in debt, someone borrowed that money. Where did it go? Throughout 2022 and early 2023, investigators uncovered the truth. Billions of yuan had been diverted to personal accounts, to offshore shell companies, to side businesses that had nothing to do with building apartments. Money meant for construction went to electric car factories that never produced vehicles. Money meant for one project got used to start 5 other projects. Money meant for one city got used in a different city. Money meant for home buyers got used to pay bond investors. It was financial chaos. The records were a mess. The accounting was fiction. September 28, 2023. Hui Ka-yen was detained. Police arrived at his mansion in Shenzhen, a $20 million property with an indoor pool, private cinema, and luxury car collection. They took him into custody. No trial date set, no bail, just detention. The official charge, illegal crimes. That's the phrase Chinese authorities use before formal charges are filed. Within weeks, the charges became more specific. Illegal fund diversions, financial mismanagement, suspected fraud. From Asia's richest man, $43 billion in 2017, to a prisoner awaiting trial in 2023. His assets, frozen, his bank accounts seized, his properties confiscated. Other executives followed. Chief Financial Officer Pan Durong detained, senior vice presidents detained, board members under investigation. Evergrande had been trying to restructure its offshore debt. The company owed international bondholders over $20 billion. For 2 years, they negotiated, proposed plans, made promises. On January 29, 2024, a Hong Kong High Court judge had enough. Justice Linda Chan ordered Evergrande's liquidation. The company would be dissolved, assets sold to pay creditors. Her reasoning was blunt. It would be a cure worse than the disease to allow this to continue. The largest offshore debt restructuring in Chinese history had failed. Liquidators were appointed. International law firms hired to sort through the wreckage. Hui Kaoyan remains in detention, awaiting trial. If convicted, he faces life imprisonment. His family is under investigation. Evergrande is being liquidated in Hong Kong and dismantled in mainland China. State-owned enterprises are buying choice assets. Of the 1.6 million unfinished apartments, about 40% are being completed with government assistance. The other 60%? Uncertain. Some will eventually be finished, many won't. The 80,000 wealth management investors, most will recover pennies on the dollar, if that. Standing in line with everyone else, hoping for some payment. Home buyers, over $100 billion in home value lost or trapped in unfinished properties. Investors, $6 billion in wealth management products, mostly gone. Banks, tens of billions in bad loans that will never be repaid. Suppliers, billions in unpaid invoices leading to thousands of bankruptcies. International bondholders, over $20 billion in defaulted debt. Add it all up, and Evergrande destroyed somewhere between $300 and $500 billion in wealth. But the damage goes beyond numbers. China's property sector, which was 30% of GDP, has been contracting for 3 straight years. Prices down 20 to 30% in major cities, sales volumes down 50%. Local governments that depended on land sales for revenue are in fiscal crisis. Many can't pay for basic services. Youth unemployment in China reached record highs. The lie-flat movement grew from internet joke to genuine social phenomenon. And most significantly, the Chinese dream of homeownership, the belief that property always goes up, that buying an apartment is the path to prosperity. That dream is broken. A generation of Chinese people watched their life savings vanish. Watched the largest company in the biggest property market in the world collapse despite being too big to fail. They learned a hard lesson. There's no such thing as too big to fail. Not even in China. So what actually happened? How did this get so bad? Let's start with the obvious. Evergrande committed fraud. Money was stolen. Laws were broken. People lied. But that's not the full story, because Evergrande wasn't some rogue company operating in secret. They were the second largest property developer in China, listed on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, audited by Ernst & Young, regulated by Chinese authorities. Everyone could see what Evergrande was doing. The question is, why didn't anyone stop them? Here's the truth. The system wanted Evergrande to succeed. Think about local governments. Mayors in China are judged on one metric, GDP growth. Build more, your career advances. Build less, you're done. 40% of local government revenue came from land sales. So when Evergrande wanted to buy land, massive plots in 280 cities, mayors lined up to sell to them. More land sales meant more revenue. More revenue meant higher GDP numbers. Higher GDP numbers meant promotions. Nobody wanted to slow down the money machine. Banks had the same incentive. Lending to property developers was profitable, the loans were huge, the interest rates were good, and everyone assumed property prices would keep rising. Where's the risk? By 2021, Chinese banks had $7 trillion in property-related loans. $7 trillion, that's more than the entire economy of Germany. They weren't just exposed to Evergrande, they were exposed to the entire property sector, which meant they couldn't afford to see property prices fall. So they kept lending, even when the warning signs were everywhere. Then there's the moral hazard problem. For decades, Chinese companies operated under an implicit assumption. If you're big enough, important enough, the government won't let you fail. State-owned enterprises got bailed out constantly. Private companies with strong party connections got rescued. The pattern was clear. So Evergrande took bigger risks, borrowed more money, expanded into crazy ventures like electric cars and theme parks. Why not? If things went wrong, Beijing would step in, right? Except this time Xi Jinping said no. The message to markets was brutal but necessary. You're adults, you took the risk, you pay the price. There's also the cultural factor nobody wants to talk about. In China, property isn't just an investment. It's the only major investment most families trust. The stock market, seen as rigged, corporate bonds, too complicated, bank deposits, returns too low. Real estate was the one thing that made sense. You could see it, touch it, live in it, and prices always went up. So 70% of household wealth went into property. No diversification, no balance. All your eggs in one basket. When that basket breaks, you've lost everything. The regulatory failures were just as significant. Ernst & Young audited Evergrande's books for years. They saw the numbers. They raised internal concerns. But they kept signing off on the financial statements. Why? Because auditors face the same pressure as everyone else. Don't kill the golden goose. If EY had refused to sign off, Evergrande would have just hired a different auditor. EY would lose a huge client. Some other firm would get paid instead. The incentive is always to go along, to trust management, to assume the best, until it all collapses. Chinese regulators saw the warning signs too. The debt levels, the declining cash flows, the violations of the three red lines policy. But taking action against Evergrande meant taking action against thousands of other companies doing similar things. It meant potentially crashing the property market, potentially triggering exactly the crisis they were trying to prevent. So they waited, hoping the problem would somehow fix itself. It didn't. What Evergrande reveals is a fundamental contradiction in China's economic model. The Communist Party wants to control markets, wants to direct capital, wants to achieve specific growth targets. But you can't control markets without eliminating risk. And if you eliminate risk, if everyone believes the government will always bail them out, you create moral hazard. You encourage reckless behavior. China is now facing a problem that's bigger than Evergrande. The property-driven growth model is over. China's population is aging. Fewer young families buying first homes. Urbanization is slowing. Cities aren't growing like they used to. The demographic reality doesn't support building millions of apartments every year. But 30% of China's GDP came from real estate and related industries. Construction, steel, cement, furniture, home appliances, all of it tied to housing. If property contracts, how does China grow? That's the question Beijing doesn't have an answer to yet. The implications go beyond China's borders. For the last 2 decades, China contributed about 30% of global economic growth. If China's economy slows significantly, the whole world feels it. Commodity exporters lose their biggest customer. Luxury brands lose their fastest growing market. Supply chains that depend on Chinese manufacturing face disruption. The Evergrande collapse is a warning to other emerging markets too. Debt-fueled growth has limits. You can borrow your way to prosperity for a while. But eventually, the debt has to be serviced. Eventually, reality catches up. Turkey tried it. Their currency collapsed. Argentina tried it. They defaulted. Again. Now China is learning the same lesson. The other lesson, and maybe the most important one, is about trust. The Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy rests on an implicit deal with citizens. You give up political freedoms, we give you economic prosperity. For 40 years, that deal held. Living standards rose every year. Each generation lived better than the one before. But what happens when property values collapse, when life savings disappear, when the promise of rising prosperity breaks? Young Chinese people are already responding. The lie-flat movement, refusing to participate in the rat race, questioning whether working hard and saving actually leads anywhere. That's not just an economic problem for China, it's an existential political problem. The final question, could this have been prevented? Yes, easily. If regulators had enforced debt limits years earlier, if auditors had blown the whistle, if banks had stopped lending when warning signs appeared, if local governments had prioritized stability over growth, if any part of the system had said, stop, this has gone too far. But every part of the system benefited from the bubble continuing. Every part had incentives to look the other way. That's why Evergrande collapsed. Not because of one man's greed, not because of one company's fraud. Because the entire system was built on a foundation of debt, speculation, and the belief that property prices would rise forever. And when everyone believes something can't fail, that's exactly when it does. January 2024. If you fly into any major Chinese city today, you'll see them. Unfinished towers, dozens of them, sometimes hundreds. Concrete shells against the skyline, cranes frozen in place. Construction sites abandoned mid-project. They're monuments to the Evergrande era, physical evidence of broken promises. Some are being completed slowly with government help. State-owned construction companies finishing what Evergrande started. The apartments will eventually be delivered, years late, but delivered. Many others will never be finished, too expensive to complete, not enough money, not enough buyers. Those buildings will just stand there, modern ruins in the middle of Chinese cities, reminders of what happens when an entire economy becomes addicted to one asset class. Hui Ka-yen sits in detention awaiting trial, his $43 billion fortune gone, his empire dismantled, his legacy destruction. When his trial happens, he'll likely be sentenced to life in prison. Chinese courts don't look kindly on this scale of financial fraud. The people he hurt are still waiting. Chen Wei and Wang Jun, the young couple who saved for 10 years, their apartment is 65% complete. Construction recently resumed with government funding. Maybe by 2025, they'll finally move in. Maybe. They're the lucky ones. Mrs. Liu, the 68-year-old teacher who invested her pension, she got back 11% of her money. 88,000 yuan out of 800,000. She's working part-time at a tutoring center now. She'll never retire. Zhang Ming, the construction worker, he eventually found work at a different construction site. But Evergrande still owes him 47,000 yuan. He's legally a creditor. in line with thousands of other creditors. The liquidators estimate he might receive 5% of what he's owed. Maybe, in several years. For most of Evergrande's victims, there will be no recovery, no compensation, no justice beyond watching Huikayan go to prison. The $300 billion is gone, destroyed. Money that could have built actual value in the economy instead vanished into a black hole of financial engineering and fraud. So who pays the final bill? Everyone. Homebuyers pay with reduced housing wealth and years of waiting. Investors pay with permanent losses. Workers pay with unpaid wages and lost livelihoods. Suppliers pay with bankruptcies. Banks pay with bad loans that taxpayers will ultimately cover. And the Chinese economy pays with slower growth, shaken confidence, and a property sector that will take a decade to recover, if it ever does. The broader question remains unanswered. What comes next for China? For 40 years, China's economic model was simple. Build apartments, build factories, build infrastructure, build everything. That model delivered the fastest economic growth in human history, lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, created a middle class of 400 million people, but it also created Evergrande and dozens of companies just like it. Now China has to find a new growth model, one based on consumption, innovation, services, not just construction. Making that transition won't be easy. Japan tried it in the 1990s and spent 30 years in stagnation. Will China be different? Nobody knows. What we do know is this: the Evergrande collapse marks the end of an era. The era of unlimited growth, the era of property as guaranteed wealth, the era of believing the government would always step in to prevent disaster. That era is over. One man's ambition, one company's greed, one country's growth model. They collided in the largest corporate debt crisis the world has ever seen. The Chinese dream of homeownership became a nightmare for millions. The promise that hard work and saving would lead to prosperity was broken. And in cities across China, unfinished towers stand as monuments to what happens when an entire economy is built on debt and speculation. The house of cards fell, and $300 billion went down with it.